It's funny, when I first put this presentation together, we were still in the depths of the permitting, and I got invited to speak about this facility in Houston in January. So I had a winter scene for that conversation. I thanked all the people in Houston for inviting me down in January so I could escape Vermont. So we all like summer scenes. So just the front of our plant here. Another caveat: native Vermonter, born and raised here. Certainly had a older sister that went to UVM. I wanted chemical engineering, so I had to go over to Clarkson. So don't hold that against me. I know we're bitter hockey rivals. So anyway, just really quickly, I don't want to be a marketing spiel here, but just a little background on Omya, which will lead into why fuel and alternative fuels, as we're pursuing now, are so important to us. The bio kind of talked about this a little bit, but we're founded and owned, privately owned by a company or by a family in Switzerland. We crush rock. Our product goes in mostly as fillers, but also as coatings, and we don't do food and pharma in Vermont, but in our Arizona plant we do. So anything you see calcium fortified has obviously our mineral in it. Plants all over the world, pretty automated facility. So 7,000 employees worldwide obviously doesn't grab too much attention. Our plant down in Vermont has about 150 employees. Quarries. Why are we in Vermont? Everyone wants to know that. Why is a Swiss-owned company in Vermont? Especially when it comes to permitting. Permitting is pretty tough in Vermont, and people hear that you're not a Vermont-started company. They wonder why you're here. Well, we're here because of the resource. Obviously, the main resource to our facility comes from the quarries and the high-quality quarries in Vermont. Craig's going to be mad at me for not taking the South Wallingford quarry out of here. We did own 3 quarries, Middlebury being our primary quarry. We have an open house every October. If you have any geology background, it's a fun day to come to the quarry and see what we do there. But long story short, 80% of our feed comes from the Middlebury quarry. The other 20% comes from a smaller quarry just north of the plant in Florence or the town of Pittsburgh. South Wallingford we recently sold, and the high-quality stone has kind of been depleted there, so that's just aggregate operation at this point. Marble, obviously, for you geology people, very old, takes millions of years, obviously, to generate marble, but this is just a quick overview of our marble quarry. Was opened as a dimension stone quarry back in the 1800s, but we purchased it and reopened it in the late 60s, and it's everyone always asks us what's the reserve there. We have well over 50 years further reserve in that quarry, so that's why we're here. Hogback, just a quick picture. Quickly hauling to the plant. This will kind of lead into, I won't talk a lot about it right off the bat, but we have to get the feed stone to the plant. Middlebury is about 30-mile one-way haul, and we do that via trucks. You might have heard, years ago we were looking at a rail spur in and out of there. That obviously met a lot of opposition and became economically infeasible as well. But this will certainly come back into play in terms of our conversion to natural gas. We'll look at converting our transportation fleet at some point as well, but there's other priorities right now. The processing plant, just a quick overview here. We're a wet grinding plant. We take in feed stone at 18-inch minus, and we grind it down to submicron, so 5 micron and less. Again, it goes into plastics, goes into paper, goes into paints, food and pharma, etc. I won't go through the intricate process here, but we're about a 1 million ton plant. We can sell our product primarily to the paper industry as a slurry product, so it's 70% solids, 30% water. But for the plastic and some of our other end users, we have to dry that wet slurry. You're catching on here that that's where we have dryers and thus we use fuel.
If I could interrupt you.
Yeah, jump in anytime.
When I first heard about 5 micron or sub-micron, it did hit home with me, but I think the human eye can only see something like 30 microns. So we're taking this 18-inch rod and grinding it down to 30 times smaller than the human eye can see. So this grind is very, very fine grind. And sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, good point. I mean, our primary pre-grind operation gets it down to about, if you were to take 1 granular baby powder, which would be very difficult to see, that's just feeding our fine grinding circuit, and that's about 30 micron. We'll go into it. Goes into a lot of products. When you start working at Omya, you start looking at a lot of labels and finding out that, boy, there's a lot of mineral content and a lot of different things.
So if something says it has calcium carbonate, the odds are that it's Omya, or are there other?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that yes, but as you know, we all have competitors. But yeah, Omya is the worldwide leader in calcium carbonate production. So to answer your questions, no, there's other companies out there, and of course I'm not going to tell you who they are because that would be free advertising. Why are we evaluating alternative fuels? We just talked about that, and feel free to jump in anytime. I know you guys are eating, but I won't be offended if you talk with your mouth full. Obviously, to dry that slurry product and turn it into a dry powder for some of our 50% of our customers, that takes a significant amount of fuel. Right now, we use number 2 fuel oil. We use, ballpark between 3 and 4 million gallons of fuel oil annually. We all, maybe not all of us, but most of us have some interaction with cars and heating fuel, et cetera, and we know what those costs are. So, and we know what they're continuing to do. They continue to go up. So, obviously, with any process, any operation, we're looking for alternatives, looking to be more efficient, looking for optimization. In addition to consuming oil, obviously we do a lot of grinding, which takes a lot of electricity as well. So this was kind of an energy, where could we look at alternatives and really, oops, that's not me. Where could we obviously make a significant improvement? No, it's going. It's just changed color. So, we always get the question, what about other renewable energies, wind, solar, biomass? Obviously, we have to convert our boilers to whatever that alternative energy is. Wind, there is some progress with wind, but wind and solar really weren't feasible for us. Location, obviously, is a challenge. Acreage, even though we're on a close to 400-acre site, we would have had to put pretty much covered it with solar panels to get the equivalent energy needed to do just the drying portion of our product, of our process. Obviously, we started to look at other traditional fuels, propane, natural gas, etc. And then certainly, as you can imagine, feasibility analysis comes into play. Natural gas certainly showed a huge benefit. Trends seem to be, and forecasts seem to be favorable for converting to natural gas in comparison to fuel oil. So, rough numbers, we're looking at about a 50% savings on, 3 to 4 million gallons of fuel oil. So you can imagine the payback's pretty rapid, even with the investment that you'll see in a minute. Yeah, jump right in.
Do you know if this analysis, they expect the price of natural gas to keep going down or kind of stay level where it is right now?
Yeah, and that's what this tries to show here is, what is that 20-year projection? Craig, jump in, but yeah, I think at least out 20 years we expect it to stay relatively stable, and we expect that differential to remain, thus the savings to be pretty constant. That being said, we like to we like to protect ourselves. So the conversions we're doing to our dryers are going to be dual fuel. So if projections are totally wrong, we could go back to fuel oil.
Just one other comment. Great question. Natural gas is priced on per million BTU. So you might see it termed MMBTU. That stands for million BTU. For the next decade, it's almost guaranteed that natural gas will be priced between $3 and $5 per MMBTU. And as Mike analyzed this project and his team analyzed this project, they have firm pricing for liquid natural gas to the year 2020. Try to do that on diesel fuel. You can't get pricing for next month, let alone the year 2020. So this is a very, very abundant fuel in North America. We're really blessed with a great fuel, good pricing, and it's very sustainable just by converting to this fuel. And Mike will get to this, we reduce our emissions by 25%, so everyone wins.
Any thoughts on potential impact on costs from increased regulations for hydrobracketing, for example?
Yeah, that's a common question, and there's a lot of you read about it every day. There's a lot of concerns about that. We think the regulations have escalated to a more significant level now. We don't expect the cost to change all that much more from where they've been in the last 5 years, but yeah, that's hard to predict. Yeah, I mean, like with any new fuels or any new technology, the regulations always kind of lag. We think they're starting to catch up, and we hope, economically that doesn't change that forecast all that much. But yeah, it's difficult to predict, obviously. So we talked about obviously the economic advantages. Craig just mentioned, obviously. Environmental gain, we're all going through the Vermont gas pipeline, and you read in the papers the controversy on that. Certainly as you burn the fuel, the emissions are significantly less, as indicated there. Environmentally, if you go back, cradle to grave, so to speak, all the way back to how it's extracted from the earth, you'll get the argument that, maybe the environmental gain isn't as significant as the users or the suppliers are making it sound to be, but that'll be a debate for some time, I'm sure. But certainly for us and for our consumption right now, it's a significant reduction to what's emitted out of our plant. Good reliability, Craig, feel free to jump in, but I think we see pretty good stability there. Technology, while gas is somewhat, newer in Vermont, it's certainly well proven throughout the U.S. and in other parts of New England. Our big challenge here is there's no supply to where we are plant-wise. So, as you can see, I put my big Omya up there. If you look at the existing piping infrastructure in New England, it's certainly pretty pronounced. Southern portions of New England, and certainly, again, a utilized fuel. We unfortunately don't have access to the pipeline, and again, that's what Vermont Gas is certainly trying to do. The Canadian source, as I say in my note there, does pipe to this area. It's obviously pretty common here throughout Burlington area. We've all heard phase 1 of Vermont Gas's pipeline project is get it down to Middlebury in the next 4 years. We'll see, and then certainly beyond that, down to the Rutland area after that. So we look at a 7 to 10 year time frame before piped gas even becomes available to us. So obviously through all this analysis, we looked at the economics, check. We think it's well regulated. There's still obviously some likely more regulation to some of the fracking practices, but we think overall it's a pretty mature industry, pretty well regulated. NFPA does address a lot of the the consumption and the equipment used for consuming natural gas. It's been in place for the 60s, and certainly many revisions thereover. And transportation, we got to get it here. It's going to have to be trucked, and the transportation history is pretty good. I mean, like anything, you're going to hear, the isolated incidents of issues, but overall, that's certainly important to us. We certainly don't want to see any issues with the delivery. As I said, this will be delivered via tractor vehicles. These are similar to what you see hauling fuel oil, similar to what you see hauling propane, 10 to 13,000 gallon cryogenic trailers. We're liquefying this for the obvious reason. As you liquefy the gas, it compresses it. It's all about storage at this point. So the more we can compress it, the more we can store, and that'll play a role in the transportation conversion as well. A year ago, as we started looking at this, we really thought, if I go back a slide, we really thought we were going to be supplied by a facility down off Boston Harbor. A lot of that was foreign natural gas, Turks and Caicos, I think, and Trinidad, Tobago, to get where I want a vacation versus where the gas is coming from, and was coming in by barge. Since then, we've really started to look at domestic sources, and we're working through a contract right now with local sources in the Pennsylvania area, down in the Reading. It's the Temple LNG facility, which has been in operation since '72. We'll talk about the facility in a minute here, but we'll be looking on average about 1 to 2 truck deliveries per day. So not a big truck traffic impact.
How does that compare with the fuel oil deliveries you have now?
Yeah, this is going to spur some discussion as well, but right now our fuel oil is delivered via rail car. Rail is vital to our business. About 80% of Vermont Rail's business is shipping our product to our customers and getting oil to our facility as well. Regulations right now and infrastructure don't provide for natural gas in any ways to be railed in. We hope someday that changes, and certainly that's something we'd be interested in, having the rail access that we have now. So anyway, this is just a quick opportunity here to talk about, obviously, whether you heard about it up here in the Burlington area or not. This was deemed to be the Public Service Board and this gas LNG facility fell under the jurisdiction of the DPS and the Public Service Board. So Act 248 versus 250 seems a little odd because public service, right? They're looking obviously over our best interests, but this gas facility that we have proposed here and that we're constructing is for exclusive uses at our facility. We're not selling gas on the side to any other users. That all the same, we went through the 248 process. Big part of this is everyone wants to know what's it going to look like. So again, at the time, as we were designing it, as we were permitting it, a lot of these renditions that were done are about that. So obviously to comply, we have the local permits, we have the DEC permits, or the Agency of Natural Resource permits, stormwater, air, discharges, local zoning, planning, and then as I spoke to, the 248 requirements. Again, there isn't another facility like this right now in Vermont, so I think there was a lot of conservative approaches by us in the permitting process, and certainly by the DEC and by the Public Service Board. So we started permitting this over a year ago, and you'll see that in the schedule. In terms of project safety, obviously, to tell you the truth, I think environmentally this is pretty benign. In terms of safety, that seemed to be the biggest discussion points as we went through the permitting process. So obviously design and operation needed to comply with an FPA, the fueling portion and the burner retrofit as well, and then transportation regulations also applied. if you're familiar, if you're a native Vermonter, you're familiar with Act 250, 248 likewise has a big community component to it. So a lot of outreach was done locally and regionally. We even went as far as doing outreach with communities where we were going to transport the gas from the supplier to our facility. Didn't want anyone to certainly be unaware of our project. Again, renditions here. I do have some real pictures, so bear with me here. This is our facility. And again, this was used just to kind of give you a perspective. This is our operating facility. This was the size of what we were doing as an installation. Again, this is about a 400-acre parcel. This is about in the middle of the parcel. You can't see this from anywhere off our property. You'll see the heights here in a minute, but we're about 45 feet in height. There's no aesthetic issue. I think one of the people that have called in is one of our consultants. We went as far as looking at, okay, if there's a catastrophic event here, what's the thermal flux? What's the fire potential if in the rare event that you have the right concentrations and you have an ignition source? Catastrophic failure, we're protecting obviously our own employees and our own infrastructure here based on this location, and we don't even come close to the property lines as well. So a lot of that goes into the permitting. I always stick in here that permitting anything in Vermont is difficult. So fortunately, we have a lot of experience with it. Again, perspective here, just to show property boundaries, where some of the neighbors are, where this facility is. A little scratchy here, but I'm going to skip right through that. That doesn't show you too much. But, getting trucks in and out of here, not only for deliveries, but also for potential future fueling of our ore trucks. Managing stormwater out there and tying that into existing stormwater features. I guess stormwater has been a big discussion on some of these brown bags. So, obviously we value stormwater at our plant more so than many in that we consume a lot of water at our plant being a wet grinding process. So not obviously, but we harvest the stormwater at our facility. Anything that hits any part of the watershed throughout our facility, we're collecting that water and consuming it back into the process. So instead of, we have stormwater conveyance, we have stormwater treatment, everything we would traditionally have, but instead of discharging it off-site, we store it and then we use it, and we obviously recycle water around and around that way. Just a quick general arrangement here. This is 8 15,000 gallon vertical storage tanks, so we have 120,000 gallon equivalents of natural gas being stored there. These blocks you see on the left here are vaporizers. So obviously we're storing this as a liquid in insulated tanks. We're warming it up through vaporizers and feeding it to the plant. And the plant burns obviously the natural gas. Just 2 other things to show you here. Trucks come in. This is all obviously a secure fenced-in area. It comes into an offloading containment area. We also have offloading containment. This is all within a burned area as well, as you saw on that. I guess I'll get to that in a minute. Now let's go right to this. Here we go. Real pictures. It's no longer just a design. I actually took these earlier this week. We're about a month away from commissioning. We're probably 80% done construction-wise. Working on a lot of electrical, a lot of finished offloading area on the opposite side, instrumentation building to the right there. But again, this gives you a perspective of, again, what it looks for. So you can see clearly the vertical tanks, the vaporizers. Our pipeline is buried to and connected to our existing fuel oil pipeline bridge, which takes it into the plant. And we have 6 dryers that we have 2 spray dryers and 4 flash dryers that we use in our drying operation. going to spend a lot of time on this, but again, just some specifications on the tanks, on the vaporizers. You'll see the word icebreakers there. Obviously, even though we have cold winters here, this material is negative 270. So we're actually forming more ice from the facility itself than the Vermont winters. We do have some trim heaters, etc. I think snow removal is certainly going to be a challenge for us with any containment area. You drive around Vermont, you see containment for fuel oil. Well, again, gas in its liquid state before it vaporizes, you still have containment for that. Truck offloading, again, pretty mature, pretty established infrastructure for delivering via truck. This just shows you the back end of a truck. Connections are pretty straightforward. Offloading, Craig, is about an hour to offload a 10 to 13,000 gallon truck, I believe.
You can see how the offload lines freeze up as they're pressing the liquid off of the truck.
Again, this will be pretty much automated, as tied into a lot of the automation in the plant. This isn't, a manned system 24/7, so to speak, but certainly be equipped with a lot of monitoring equipment, a lot of cameras. You can see from the control room itself and from any desktop within the plant, you can see the operations, you can see flows, you can see pressures, you can see temperatures, etc. So pretty automated system. Craig, I'm just going to skip over this. I know you have a few other slides on this, so I won't talk about that. But again, the real priority for this project, and about 90% of our fuel oil consumption is through our drying circuit. The other 10% is the transportation, the fuel consumed during transportation. So the priority obviously was to target the drying system and get those converted, and this will be secondary. We did permit it at the time that we went through all the permitting, and it'll be an add-on probably next spring. Again, time frames. We started a lot of outreach even before February 2012, but the real hardcore permitting was about a 200-day process. We were issued our certificate of public good from the Department of Public Service November of last year. A lot of design and equipment procurement, and then obviously construction has been about as you can see, about a 9-month process. We should finish up ahead of schedule, about 45 days ahead of the schedule that you see. So we really are looking at commissioning starting in October, end of September, early October. Obviously, again, goes without saying, but this is a pretty high priority project for Regions America. Significant savings associated with this, so it's gotten a lot of resources and a lot of team effort on getting this through the process. And then, again, just there's always questions, but we have been talking with Vermont Gas. Not sure if you said one of them might be here today. Oh, okay, great. Owen, right?
Incognito.
Great. So we get the question, obviously, is what happens, 7, and maybe you have some new updates for us, but we're using those numbers for getting down to our facility. But yeah, we've certainly communicated with them. We've looked at our facility and looked at what opportunity as gas comes down, and if it's competitive, we would certainly convert or we would tie into the pipeline. But we've obviously talked with Vermont Gas about what role this facility can play as part of the overall pipeline project. So we think we've been smart about the whole design here from soup to nuts to make it sustainable for decades. And then, again, other things down the road we are certainly looking at, as we talked about, converting different equipment. Our priority right now is our truck fleet, but obviously we see worldwide that natural gas has been used to fuel other types of equipment, large and small, so certainly that's something we continue to look at, and we'll continue beyond this project. I think that was mine, Craig. So Craig has a couple slides on transportation. I know I went a little long, but is that of interest to talk about our? You want to do that, Craig?
Sure, yeah.
And then we can, I'm sure you guys have some great questions for us.
Okay. I'm new to Vermont. I've only been here a year, and I've worked in a number of states. I'll say this is the first state I've ever come across where natural gas wasn't piped into everybody's homes. Every production facility I've ever worked at had a natural gas pipeline feeding the production plant. So Vermont is unique in not having natural gas. And that's why we're doing what we're doing in Florence, Vermont. Perhaps the more applicable use for liquid natural gas, however, and a contribution to more of society might be in powering other devices like automobiles, trucks, locomotives, marine transportation. And we don't have a firm commitment on LNG for other uses yet, but Mike and his team have really plowed snow, and what they're doing now is they're challenging the rest of us to come up with applications for LNG. I work in the mining department, and working with Mike is actually Mike and his plant is like a customer to us. We mine the rock and provide feed material to him. We transport the rock about 30 miles, and we currently do that with diesel tractors. So one thing we're looking at in-house is, can we do the same responsibility more responsibly by using LNG tractors? So I just want to walk us through some of our thought process, and this thought process can really be applied to any of you and what you do, and maybe even personal vehicles. But just some, and these aren't Omya slides, these are just meant to be food for thought to drive some interaction here, so please step in. A tractor that you see on the highway, a truck, but we call them tractors, typically runs about 100,000 miles a year. So that's one of the variables. Now let's look at costs. If you were to go out and buy a brand new Peterbilt over-the-road tractor, it costs about $130,000. In the diesel version, to go out today and buy that same tractor in a liquid natural gas version costs $210,000. There's a big premium to be paid. There's an $80,000 premium currently. We think a lot of that may be supply and demand rather than pure technology right now. There's a short supply on these engines and a pretty big demand that's growing quickly. Another variable that we want to consider is what's the difference in price between diesel and liquid natural gas. Mike showed this number on another slide, but right now there's about a $2 differential. It costs $4 a gallon to go out and buy diesel number 2. If we had a fueling station out there and we went to buy the same energy content in the form of liquid natural gas, it only costs $2. Big differential here. So this is the carrot on the end of the stick. Okay, and then one other variable you need to consider is how much fuel does a tractor burn? And on average, a tractor pulling a standard 80,000 gross vehicle weight that you see every day in this community and others burns about 5 gallons, 5 miles to the gallon. So that's the fuel efficiency. So knowing these variables, again, there's an $80,000 differential on capital. How do we justify paying that extra money for liquid natural gas? Well, we saw fuel savings. Remember, the tractor runs 100,000 miles a year, 5 miles to the gallon, so it burns about 20,000 gallons of fuel per year. And we saw we get a $2 per gallon savings by converting to liquid natural gas. So the net savings, in very simple terms, is about $40,000 a year. That's a big number. So does that justify paying $80,000 more for the machine? In our world, that's a 2-year payback. Paying $80,000 premium for an LNG tractor, but gaining $40,000 savings per year, in very, very simplistic terms, is about a 2-year payback. In the business world, that's a good project. We can sell these projects internally very easily. Yeah.
What's the life of a truck in terms of?
Great question, and this is early adopter stuff, so we haven't seen one of these engines go to its full life yet. This technology's only been out for about 5 years. Typically a tractor, a diesel version of a tractor, goes 1 million miles, and then it starts breaking down metallurgically. We predict we'll get the same equal, life cycle out of the LNG, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Yes?
A couple of questions. So with a gas truck, you don't have to worry about idling it during the winter either, is that? You don't have to worry about diesel fuel gelling in the lines in the truck.
And I'll address that question in just a second, okay, because there's 2 types of engines. One currently still uses a little bit of diesel, but so can I defer answering?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Okay, so we've got a good project here, so why isn't everybody rushing out and buying LNG tractors?
Access.
Huh?
Access to the LNG.
Exactly. How do we fuel these things up? So this is a perfect chicken versus the egg story. The technology's there to run LNG, but how do we fuel up these machines? In the year 2012, these were the fueling stations in North America. We've got a handful of fueling stations. These 2 right here I'm very familiar with. These are private stations owned by a company called Robert Transportation up in Montreal. You'll see their orange tractors on the highway. They've invested in 180 LNG tractors, so they're running them on a daily basis between Montreal and Toronto. So they put in an LNG fueling station, but it's purely captive. They strictly fuel their own machines. Few public stations are opening by a company called Clean Energy. This was at the year end of 2012. Or I'm sorry, this depiction is the end of 2012. And moving into 2013, we see the infrastructure building, but that doesn't help us a lot in Vermont, does it? There's none of these triangles, or fueling stations are situated where we need them. So the biggest problem in converting to LNG is the infrastructure doesn't support the technology yet. This is a typical liquid natural gas fueling station, so pretty simple. 15,000 gallon cryogenic tank. And this is like a thermos bottle. Looks simple, big dollars, however. In fact, I think I can comment. Mike's project at the Florence, Vermont facility is in excess of $10 million. For those 8 tanks and vaporizers and pipeline. Look pretty simple, but this is expensive equipment. It's all stainless, double-walled, vacuum. And it's supply and demand. There's really only one company that can provide this equipment right now. Good public stock, by the way. It's called Chart Industries out of Minnesota. Again, supply and demand. They're sold out on these cryogenic parts. Okay, so this is a fueling station. This is a supply truck coming to a fueling station. In the systems that most design, they put in accounting and security card readers ahead of going into a fueling station, so not just anybody can pull up to the station and try to activate. The dispenser looks pretty similar to what we're used to. The nozzle's a little bit more robust, however. This is a cam lock system, so the male-female type of connection to ensure no leakage and a positive seal.
Are the gas facilities in Montreal and Toronto kind of self-serve, or are they attended? Or?
No, they're private
Oh, they're
stations.
private.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
that's
they're
right.
strictly held on private property,
Yeah.
and their drivers are trained to operate the equipment.
I
And
can't
then,
see my grandmother hooking up her car with those two.
everybody's afraid of this, but
Yeah.
I haven't done it, but I've almost done it. I've been, this close to doing it, and
Yeah.
it's pretty simple. This is the receiver on the fuel tank. So the fuel tank, as you look at it, you can't tell it's LNG. But the dispenser just connects here, and you offload the fuel. Okay, here's another problem. Again, chicken versus the egg. We have a bunch of engine alternatives out there. However, if you read the fine print, look at the launch dates on these engines. The only two that are available to any of us right now is this 9-liter engine, which is a spark-ignited engine. So it's an Otto cycle in thermodynamic terms. It's very similar to what our gasoline engines, how they perform. It's a spark-ignited engine, 9 liters. And then the other option is way out there, huge, 15-liter engine that runs on the diesel thermodynamic cycle. And because it runs on the diesel cycle, the current design uses approximately 5% diesel still in the fuel system. And I'll show you how this works in a second, but I was trying to address your question on gelling. So if one were to use this bigger engine, you still have diesel, and you still have to treat the machine as it were a diesel unit. So you'd have to plug in the winter and maybe convert to diesel number 1 in cold temperatures, and you still have the same challenges. You're just not burning as much of it. But again, we have two options. We have a 9-liter and a 15-liter. This big gap in between. This ISX 12-liter is just coming out right now, and it's a beautiful engine made by Cummins. It's a spark-ignited engine, but it'll give us 400 horses. It's getting pretty darn close to what we need. This will pull at least an 80,000 gross vehicle weight, which you see on the highway systems. Another one coming out next year at about this time by Volvo is a 13-liter. That's going to be a beauty. Okay, now the manufacturers available to us right now, there aren't many. If we were to go out and try to buy an LNG engine, or not engine, but a fully equipped tractor right now, we have two options. Peterbilt and Kenworth, both owned by the same company called PACCAR. They're using the big 15-liter dual fuel engine right now. That's the only alternative for the big heavy loads. In the smaller engine, the 9-liter engine, you can get that engine in any one of these manufacturers. However, that just doesn't pull the loads most of us need in industry. The fuel tank, again, is like a thermos. You can put 1 or 2 of these on a vehicle. Each fuel tank is typically 120 gallons, gives you about 300 miles. So if you have 2 tanks, you get about 500 to 600 miles. Inside the fuel tank, you have a submersible pump. And, okay, so this depicts an LNG fuel tank. This depicts a diesel fuel tank, so you have both on the same machine, on the same tractor. Your engine puts off a lot of heat. That heat is transferred to a coolant. The pump from the LNG fuel pumps liquid natural gas to come into an indirect contact with the coolant lines off of the engine, and that causes the liquid to flash to a vapor. Once it's in a gas form, it's captured in a receiving tank, metered to about 4,600 psi. It's filtered, and diesel comes into the engine, pretty traditional through a filter, a traditional pump. Everything comes into this control module. And from the control module, Both of these fuels feed a kind of a dual-purpose injector that injects the fuel into the engine. The center post on this injector is your standard diesel. So the way this works is about 5% diesel is squirted into the cylinder walls. The piston compresses the diesel and it ignites. As soon as it ignites, the natural gas is metered into this arm of the injector. So 95% of the heat value comes from the natural gas. The diesel is just used as like a liquid spark plug. So it ignites the fuel, starts the power stroke, the natural gas is interjected, completes the power stroke. Pretty ingenious. I mean, very simple design. So, we as scientists haven't had to go out and reinvent the engine. We've just reinvented the injector and control mechanisms. This is a real busy slide, but just want to point out that spark-ignited engines are nice. They give a real clean burn, but they just don't give us the horsepower and the torque we need in the industrial world. So we'll always have to stay in the diesel world for driving off-road equipment and big highway trucks. The beauty with this high-pressure direct injection natural gas system is it gives us the beauty of the diesel power and torque, but we can convert to natural gas. Just one other food for thought, and this was just announced in the last month. One of my favorite companies, I've always driven Ford F-150s. Very nicely run company, run by a guy named Alan Mullally. Very forward-thinking, very good with their sustainable development programs. They just announced a partnership with this company called Westport about a month ago, and they'll be powering the Ford F-150 as an option to be used. We can use natural gas in the future, as soon as the stations arrive, so we can fuel up the machine. But kind of a neat contribution to society, not only in the industrial world, but now a consumer product. And good for Ford for that forward thinking. That's the last of our slides, but just trying to drive home the fact that LNG is on the way. And boy, we should be thankful. I know I'm going to talk to my grandchildren and be proud that I worked on this project called LNG. It's fuel that's good for the environment, good for society, reduces our costs. It's a perfect sustainable development type of fuel. Yeah.
I had a question. I was wondering if LNG is less expensive because it's less expensive to produce, or less expensive because it's subsidized by our government?
I don't know anything about subsidies, and I don't think there are any subsidies on natural gas, but it's abundant, so it's supply and demand. And it is easier to produce. It's a gas, so it's under pressure, miles beneath the earth, so as soon as you penetrate the gas reservoir, it's forcing its way up the well, and you usually have to hold it back, so it is easier to produce. It's easy to put in a pipeline and transport, from the Bakken in North Dakota to Philadelphia, and it's a very simple fuel, and we in society have used natural gas for decades, so it's not new. So I think it's supply and demand mostly, and so we are really blessed in North America to have an abundant supply, and I think this supply will last for your children's lifetime and probably your children's children's lifetimes, so natural gas is good. It's maybe a fuel that tides us over until the next better technology is developed. Yeah?
Are there projections of how much fuel source or how much fuel there is in North America? I mean, similar to how they do for...
Those numbers exist, and I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to know them. That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that, but I think that number is readily available. From my perspective, it's hundreds of years. It's about 200 years, I think. The natural gas supply, current population and current demand for fuel and use for fuel, I think it's about a 200 year supply with current technology, and that's assuming no advance in technology takes place between now and then. And we know there will be advances in technology. I'm sorry I didn't have an answer to your question, but you should be able to find that one pretty easily.
We can put Owen on the spot now that he's been outed.
There you go.
The EIA estimates are anywhere from 80 to 150 years, depending on sort of what we're considering to be economically viable as extractable resources. The number that's in my head is more than 400 trillion cubic feet is available with the inclusion of new shale plays like Marcellus shale, things like that. So assuming hydraulic fracturing continues, regulations are set up well so that it doesn't have adverse environmental impacts, as we were referencing earlier. It's sort of in that neighborhood. So that's, if I'm remembering correctly, where we stand.
You know, I shouldn't be talking about hydraulic fracking. I don't know that much about it, but I do know. I went to a mineral school, so I have a lot of friends that work in the industry, and hydraulic fracking has been around since the 50s. That's not the new technology. The new technology is horizontal drilling. So in the past, 20 years ago, to go after gas or oil, you went down with the vertical well and you penetrated something horizontal and you had a very small contact with the reservoir of oil and gas. Today, the drillers are so good, they can drill down and they can turn the drill stem to stay in the layer of natural gas or oil, and they can harvest oil and gas much more readily and more economically. So hydraulic fracking isn't the new technology. It's horizontal drilling, and the combination of both together has been a wonderful addition, you know, to stable energy for the U.S. and North America. Yes?
So would you say that one con might be that when you take power into account, the amount of horsepower you get for your rolling stock, for example, that there's some constraints there and that might be kind of limiting for the industry? Or you mentioned the sort of the hybrid diesel, natural gas, HD, I forget the acronym, but
Yeah.
is that as much as a limiting, would one consider that even a limiting factor at this point? Or
It is at this point, but
yeah.
let me get back to this slide right here. Cummins right here is, in my opinion, the best engine manufacturer in North America, perhaps the world. And right now they're working on a 15-liter. It'll be a pure natural gas. It will have no diesel in it whatsoever. So it'll probably be spark ignited, but we don't know that. But you can see the launch on this thing's a couple of years out. But if they are successful with their projections, they'll be able to put a straight natural gas engine in these big trucks.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not, you know, locked into this dual fuel concept, but the technology is so new. It's just developing monthly right now. It's we're trying to catch up all of a sudden.
How about Caterpillar, John Deere, some others? Are they getting into this at all?
They are, but they're not trying to do it on their own. They're working through a company called Westport to, and
Is that?
yeah, the same company.
Okay.
But what Caterpillar's doing, Caterpillar has small, medium, and really, really big equipment. And their big equipment, like a truck, for instance, starts at a couple hundred tons and goes all the way up to 400 tons of payload. 400 tons of payload is 4 rail cars in one truck. These are big trucks. So Caterpillar's expending their energy right now on the big machines. Okay, so we won't see it in the scale of equipment that we use for about 10 years, but in about 5 years, the big mines, the really big mines, will have natural gas powering their big off-road trucks. Yeah. And then also Caterpillar's working with locomotives, so they're working with Canadian National right now up in Montreal to power locomotives with natural gas. And the neat thing there is they can just put a tank of natural gas right behind the locomotive, and fuel that power unit, all the way across Canada or North America more cleanly and more economically. So also there are a couple of big ferries off of New Brunswick that are now being powered by natural gas, a couple of big container ships out of Seattle. The applications just keep coming. I think in our lifetime we'll see so many applications for natural gas that we'll take it for granted eventually. But we're at the exciting early adopter stage right now. So
is the industry focusing on the larger vehicles at this point, mainly, or just
well,
I'm also wondering, what this means for the automobile? Does this mean that the automobile is obviously being a smaller engine might not have something available until much later, beyond 2016?
Yeah, a good question. Caterpillar's thinking big, but Ford is thinking consumer.
Yeah.
So they're thinking small.
Yeah.
And Peterbilt's are thinking in between for the over the highway. So I think it's being attacked by different companies in different ways.
Okay.
So I don't think there's any limits, but it becomes economic at some point because these cryogenic tanks cost so much money. You can't put them on every pickup truck and expect the consumer to pay the extra premium. It's a hard sell. So we're just in the early stages here.
On the smaller scale, there are natural gas vehicles available at every weight class, basically. So everything from the Honda Civic up through the Ford Series, the 150 now, all the way up to the 5 and 650. There are Econoline vans, there are Ford Transit Connect little vans that can run around. So there's a website, NGV America, that has a list of all the available natural gas vehicles. Typically, what we see in the light and medium duty sector is compressed natural gas, but liquefied. It's a far simpler and arguably more consumer-friendly technology than the LNG. When you're fueling the LNG, you're supposed to have PPE on, so your safety glasses, gloves, and everything, because of the fact that it's a cryogenic liquid. Make sure that it's safe. CNG is currently available at the DPW down on Pine Street, so there are natural gas vehicles running around. Casella has 11 trucks that are running on them that you can see driving around. They're all painted. The buses, the gas buses, are natural gas, and that's all compressed rather than liquefied. So that's really making more of the inroads on the smaller scale. I think what the industry is seeing is that, like you were saying, there really is an economic point where if you're using enough fuel, it makes sense. A lot of small cars just don't. It was the same issue that hybrids ran into when they were first coming into the markets. It cost so much more to buy them that there wasn't the payback in the long run. I think the other sort of hurdle is in the heavy-duty sector, you need the power, and there aren't as many electric options, for instance, to handle the power output that you need to haul 99,000 pounds. So natural gas has a nice sort of fit for that market, whereas I think electric is really making some great inroads on the smaller scale vehicle side. And so probably what we'll see is a pretty diversified portfolio going forward, sort of Obama's, all of the above approach, if you will, to alternative transportation technologies.
Well, thanks.
I do want to just say thanks for everyone coming, and everyone can feel free to stay and chat. We do have the room for another half hour. Thanks for coming, and also just want to mention that on September 13th, we have Jack Courtney coming from Fletcher Allen talking about healthcare and transportation. He's the head of the transportation. He's the transportation coordinator for Fletcher Allen. So thank you both for coming and sharing all of your experiences. It's very great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.